Hey, so barring any further complications, this video should be going up on my birthday, April 20th. Which is a birthday I share with the anniversaries of two series in particular. The first of which is Fire Emblem, which, ever since Engage dropped, I've had conflicting feelings on, so we're not talking about that today. That might be its own video. 1212. But the other series whose anniversary lines up with my birthday is Super Robot Wars, a multi-licensed mecha crossover series of SRPGs that has been running for quite a long time now. And while I am a little apprehensive at the prospect of covering a series since copyright strikes are a YouTuber's worst friend, there are also a bunch of strange spin-offs that should be quite a bit safer while also having slight rabbit holes of their own. But before we talk about the weirdness that is Super Robot Pinball, let me talk about how I'm running it this time because, whoo, this was the biggest delay to this video. You see, I'm using hardware to record this one. Also because I was intending to do another video before the unfortunate series of events happened. But my GameCube, and by extension my Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance setup, is pretty solid overall. I've got the SD Media Launcher along with Game Boy interface, as well as an SD2 SP2 Pro. I'm sorry, SD2 SP2 Poor. And all was going well until the optical drive on my recording GameCube died. And while I have a backup GameCube, it's not really suited for recording because it's not a DOL 001. Why that's important is the DOL 001 has stuff like Serial Port 2, which is used for the SD2 SP2 Pro, as well as the digital video out, which I use for my Prism. But hey, it works, and I do want to use this setup more in the future. I think the only thing I need to do is upgrade my capture card. But enough grousing, let's get into Super Robot Pinball. 1212. So Super Robot Pinball comes courtesy of Banpresto, as they held all the rights at the time before Bandai Namco ate them up, as well as from Media Factory and a developer called Jupiter, whom most people would know as the developers that made half the Pokemon Minis library. And I guess some weird niche game that Drill happens to like. Now, from the few seconds of gameplay that I've been showing so far, one thought might be running through your head. Hey, this looks a lot like Pokemon Pinball, what the heck is up with that? And yeah, about that. We're going to make a brief detour at pinball games for the Game Boy as a whole because I promise it's relevant. Revenge of the Gator was a pinball game developed by HAL Laboratories, the Kirby people, for the Game Boy. While it's primitive and jank even by brick-ass Game Boy standards, it still set the stage for two specific pinball games. The first of which is not relevant, is Kirby's Block Ball, because of course it is, it's HAL Labs, Kirby's like their thing. The second was Pokemon Pinball itself. But you see, the most important thing about Pokemon Pinball is that it was co-developed, and that co-developer was Jupiter. So Super Robot Pinball afterwards can pretty much be seen as Jupiter taking what they learned while developing Pokemon Pinball, and then just expanding upon it. Obviously, Super Robot Pinball is more advanced because it has this magical thing called actual scrolling instead of screen flipping. So if you're coming into Super Robot Pinball off of something like Pokemon Pinball, then you're going to feel right at home, but there's still a few twists that I'm obviously going to go into. The gameplay loop of Super Robot Pinball involves racking up enough points in order to make a boss spawn. Once the boss appears, you can select a mech from the scramble hole. As with anything Super Robot Wars related, you've got a lot of good mechs from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and the original run of Evangelion. And as much as I shit on the original version of EVA, about as much as I do the Chow Garden, the version of Cruel Angel's Thesis that plays is probably one of the best tracks in the game. But once you've got your mech sorted out, then you've got to launch yourself into the enemy hole. I realize what I've said and I'm sticking with this take. Once in, the gameplay becomes a, obviously, pinballified version of a mech fight. You use the machine's spirit ability, which augments stats temporarily, by going along the loop labeled as such. Likewise, going along the track labeled attack will increase the power of your next attack. And to attack, you need to hit the enemy with the ball. It's pretty simple, honestly, and I'm obviously, especially for copyright reasons, going to spare your ears the cacophony of sound effects that plays during this. Although there might be enough sound effects drowning everything out that I could get away with it. And if your health is ever running low, you could just drop down and go heal up using the HP lane in the main table. But I don't think I did this once during any of my recordings. But if you defeat 3 boss mechs, then you get to go on to basically a bigger boss stage, which are actually closer to those bonus stages that you'd get in Pokemon Pinball. The thing about this, though, is that it actually hides the biggest deviation from Pokemon Pinball's format behind these stages. Actual fucking stage progression. Unlike Pokemon Pinball, you're not spending the whole game just staring at the same table for ages. Defeating the bonus bosses of each stage lets you advance further along, and this is where I have to admit that this was as far as I got. You see, the layout of this second table is weird, almost Sonic Spinball-esque, and that's not a good thing. So yes, sadly, this is where I admit defeat. But, to summarize my thoughts, Super Robot Pinball is a pretty pleasantly surprising game, actually. It's certainly not the gold standard of video game pinball. I reserve that spot for Devil's Crush, a game whose physical copy I absolutely cherish. But despite the fact that the boss stages blow my fucking ears out with how many sound effects there are overlapping with the music, it holds its own. I just wish I didn't have to spend so much time dealing with those stripped screws, because there's probably even more to this game. But a deadline is a deadline, and I do my best to meet said deadlines. But if you're only here for the main video, this will be it. You may go if you wish, and I will not begrudge you if you don't watch the rest. For the rest of you all, before the end cards, let's talk about game preservation, and you all likely know where this is going if you've kept up with current events. So, earlier this month, Ross Scott of Accursed Farms wound up starting his Stop Killing Games initiative, using Ubisoft's shutting down of the game, The Crew, which he had done a video on in order to, well, spearhead this. Effectively, this campaign is about making sure that games cannot just be taken down and effectively killed, especially stuff like live services or games that require an online connection. And if you've all not been able to tell, I am extremely serious about preservation. A lot of this video is a fuck it we ball moment, so I'm not using an outline or a script like I normally do, so I will apologize right off the bat for seeming quite disorganized if that happens. But as someone who's dabbled with political work in the past, I could tell you that a lot of times, laws take quite a bit of time to catch up with technology. Most of the people in charge, regardless of country, tend to be woefully inadequate with technology. So usually the only time something happens is when enough people make noise or there's an initiative kicked off by someone else. While I know any lawyers that are watching this will roll their fucking eyes at me, I am simplifying this and including case law and such in this. While I am an American and our area has probably the lowest chance of anything being done, I have done what I can as someone that has owned The Crew. And you know, I'm always down for something that spites the likes of Ubisoft, especially since their response has been the equivalent of a tantruming toddler, and removing copies of The Crew outright from players' libraries, which is kind of fucking extremely scummy. Like, while this whole section has only taken a couple of minutes to throw together, I do want to direct you all to the Stop Killing Games site to see how you all can help. Because the thing with older games is, like Super Robot Pinball here, it's always going to exist in its plain ROM form. You can always dump it or high seize it, and for legal purposes, I do not condone high seizing anything. And then run it in an emulator or pop it into a flash cart like I've done. But newer games don't get that luxury, especially in the era of always online and DRM. Hence why I decided to use the end of an otherwise short video in order to, well, spread the word for whatever little my reach has. And if you have stuck with my rambling, I do want to genuinely and sincerely thank you, and once again, the link to the Stop Killing Games site will be down below. With that being said, I will see you all in the next video.